As the Trump administration reportedly circulates a handout to members of Congress with different gun control proposals, we're going to present 5 federal gun laws Americans should demand from Congress. With me now to do so, senior legal policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, Amy Swearer. Amy, good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Amy, I want to talk about going on offense a little bit on these gun control proposals and what Republicans should demand from Democrats if we are even going to consider the idea of a compromise on anything. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the Gun-Free School Zones Act. Republicans never talk about this, but this is an incredible danger to our children in school.
Yeah, absolutely. So what this law does is essentially say you're de facto prohibited from possessing a firearm inside a school or on school property unless you have a concealed carry permit from that state. Well, the problem is a lot of states recognize other concealed carry permits from other states. But in this case, if you don't have it from that state itself, it would not apply to you, even if that state recognizes your permit. So what it does is it kind of messes with people who are from out of state and makes them felons for simply exercising their right in a place where we've seen gun attacks happen. It prohibits them from defending themselves, from defending others. And this is something that ultimately, again, just prevents the lawful exercise of a constitutional right.
Right. And so Republicans should call for the repeal of this act, or at least amend this act so that it doesn't penalize law-abiding citizens. We don't hear that from Republicans, but we should. This is one we should repeal. The other law, and this is a law that is not on the books, that ought to be on the books. This is national. It's called right to carry. It's concealed carry reciprocity laws. Republicans, every time the Democrats talk about gun control legislation, Republicans should counter and say, give us concealed carry reciprocity, and maybe we'll talk about something else.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like the Democrats and gun control advocates, they always want the federal government to take charge of, some of these laws until it's inconvenient for them. So in this case, there are certain gun control states that simply don't want people carrying. And since they can't prohibit it for people in their state, they say, fine, we'll essentially prohibit it for people out of this state. Again, just discriminating against non-residents and keeping them essentially from exercising that constitutional right.
Right. Republicans don't talk about this a lot, but they should. They should demand Congress pass this. The other thing is the Gun Control Act. This is from 1968. There's a prohibition in the Gun Control Act that bans young adults from purchasing handguns. That means law-abiding 18, 19, and 20-year-old Americans are not allowed to buy a handgun, even if they have not committed any crime. There's no reason in their background. They haven't been adjudicated as mentally unfit by a court of law. They are simply prohibited based on their age from buying a certain type of firearm. Republicans should be talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this law was, in a sense, what all gun control laws that are being proposed right now have been, which is we're going to punish law-abiding young adults for the actions of a small subset of young adults who are criminals. And it's simply not the case that we need to be prohibiting law-abiding young adults from possessing what is the most quintessential firearm for self-defense. It's the firearm that people use all the time when they're out and about in their everyday lives. And we've essentially said, not only can you not have handguns, but now they're going about saying, well, you can't really have any guns whatsoever. And it's very unfortunate. These are adults who are voting. They can serve on juries. They can get married and sign contracts. They can die in wars for this country, and they should be able to defend themselves.
They certainly should be able to. They've done nothing wrong. They're being discriminated against based on their age because the Democrats don't want anybody to be able to keep and bear arms here. Another part of the Gun Control Act's another provision in the Gun Control Act, I should say, prohibits people from purchasing a handgun from any firearm dealer that is outside the person's state of origin, meaning their home state. I don't understand that provision at all. What on earth is that supposed to protect against? Republicans should call for that part to be repealed.
Yeah, so, I mean, essentially this comes down to Congress didn't want to get into a fight over whether it could regulate intra-state commerce. And so really, you're right in saying it's pointing out that a lot of these loopholes, not loopholes, but these problems exist with background checks, just as a general rule, that there are so many ways for people to get firearms that the laws we have now aren't actually impacting that. And so they're not serving the purpose they were designed to serve. And they're really not preventing any gun deaths from occurring.
No, not at all. We've acquiesced on the right so many times to different provisions that the left has wanted, different gun control provisions, and yet it hasn't made a difference. The left solution is to continue this. The right solution should be to go back and look at what we've enacted and repeal anything that violates people's law-abiding citizens' right to bear arms but doesn't materially make us safer. The last one I talk about, Republicans should talk about this as well, because this is something the left is constantly misconstruing on purpose. They push a false narrative about this. The National Firearm Act has a restriction on silencers. Now, the left calls them silencers. People that have knowledge of firearms call them suppressors. The intention, and this does not, by the way, silence the discharge of a firearm. It simply makes it less likely to damage your hearing, but it does not prevent police from being able to hear where shots are fired. Therefore, I don't understand why we have any restrictions on this whatsoever. The government should not be telling us what to do on this.
Right, absolutely, especially because the vast majority of people who are using suppressors or what are called silencers are using them in scenarios where they're using it in law-abiding exercises, things that they can do legally, whether it's self-defense, that they don't want to lose their hearing in their home by having to fire in a room and having to deal with that noise while they're in a life or death scenario, or they're at a range. People who are firing all the time, that sort of loud noise really takes a toll on your hearing. So all it's doing is protecting, again, the lawful exercise of a Second Amendment right. And that's not something that's going to impact whether criminals can now get away with crimes, because of course they're still going to be able to hear those gunshots. It's simply protecting, again, the hearing of law-abiding citizens.
Right. And like I said, the purpose of all this is to encourage Republicans on the ground, voters, the grassroots conservative movement, as well as our legislators in Congress to go on a fence more on this. When the Democrats call for compromise, say, okay, we'll talk about compromise. You propose 5 things you want. We'll propose 5 things we want. And you tell us which one of our proposals you'd be willing to compromise on, that you'd be willing to let us have in exchange for something that you want. And I think you'll find if members of Congress did this, the left would betray the fact that they aren't interested in compromise at all. And they just want gun control, and therefore Republicans would have absolutely no responsibility, no duty to negotiate with them and violate law-abiding citizens' Second Amendment rights. Amy, I appreciate your analysis and your knowledge of all these laws. Thanks for being on the show.